I, Dr. James Wesley, place this testimony here as a record of the events leading up to the death. Note the destruction of everybody that worked at the corporate offices of Osset Pharmaceutical found in Washington State. We were told that the work we were doing was going to help people. This started last spring. I got a call from the headmaster at Carbuncle Academy. I had been studying medicine there for nearly 3 years and never once been asked to his office, so the thought of being summoned actually terrified me. Marsh was old as dirt and as stern as a brick wall. He smoked a pipe and wore clothes that looked like they belonged in the 1930s. As I entered his office, he placed a vinyl record on an old player and let classical music fill the air. He told me to close the door and asked me if I was familiar with the piece, to which I admitted that I wasn't. According to him, the music was created by a local cult leader back in the 1880s named Abraham Zwane. The headmaster explained that Zwane had managed to convince hundreds in the area to kill themselves due to a meteor shower. If I might ask, why are you telling me this, sir? His bizarre ramblings about ritualistic genocide had left me unnerved, and I wasn't entirely sure what the purpose was of my arrival to his office. He puffed his pipe again and focused his old pale eyes on me before explaining that a rumor had spread across the academy campus that I was involved in extracurricular activities with questionable students. I did not lie, and I have no intention of concealing the truth from anyone that hears this tale. Full disclosure is necessary in order for guilt and blame to be placed where they belong. When I arrived at Carbuncle Academy 3 years prior, one of my first interactions with the students was actually near the East Gate. Another student, a senior, had just plummeted from the rampart and smashed their skull all over the courtyard below. Dozens of students and teachers were trying to get a look at the grisly scene. One in particular, a young medical orderly named Herbert, told me that the student who had committed suicide had been involved in strange behaviors surrounding a church that sat in the South Courts. I have always had an inquisitive mind, and it bothered me that somebody with a bright future ahead of them would toss it all away after a single visit to an old religious institution, and so I traveled there myself. According to others that I met during my time here, many believed that the church was not made by human hands. It had an otherworldly feel about it, and people gathered there to express their interest in the unknown. The leader of these congregants was named Severn, Thomas Severn, and he greeted me like a sheep to be brought to slaughter. Considering how easily I was roped into this mess, that analogy proves true in more ways than one. Severn explained to me that the land around Carbuncle Academy was considered sacred by the local people, and of course the immigrants that settled and took over and built the academic buildings had no interest in such superstitions and plundered the land for their own benefit. The church, he claimed, was the only last remnant of the old world. I asked him about these strange rumors surrounding the church and the student that had committed suicide, and he told me that there were star charts that some students studied here in the church that the teachers considered questionable. Apparently, they showed systems that didn't match modern astrology, and therefore they were deemed inferior. The student that had jumped from the wall had somehow learned more about these charts, and that knowledge had caused them to end their life. I told all of this to Headmaster Marsh, explaining that ever since that encounter, I had dabbled in the esoteric along with Herbert and Severn. I had come to theorize that the charts which baffled so many were actually not showing any stars that we were familiar with at all, but rather from an age long past, where these skies were still luminous in this area. I also admitted to him, believed that the charts were created by visitors from the stars. Saying such things out loud made me feel foolish in front of such a learned man. But to my surprise, he only puffed his pipe and nodded in agreement. I had heard you were writing such papers under a pseudonym, trying to see if any of the other teachers in the academy agreed with you. As it turns out, there is a chapter of the school's history that has been covered up, which relates to your own investigations, and that is where the story of Zwane comes in. Headmaster Marsh explained to me that the board of directors had agreed to keep the works of Zwain under lock and key almost 100 years ago. But over the past few generations, things got forgotten and a few of the papers that the cult leader had written were able to leak. And the star charts in the books that I had been studying at the church in secret were actually part of those papers. But are you saying that there's truth to the ramblings of a fictional story where he claimed to have seen aliens? I asked. The story, which I can summarize, connected to the meteor shower that Marsh had already told me about. During the late 1880s, Zwain said that large monolithic objects fell from the sky all across Dunwich County. He believed these objects were actually from the Earth's moon, and they revealed that these aliens were living amongst us. It had sounded insane when I had studied it, but the papers had included detailed descriptions of the aliens and illustrations. The beings looked like massive slugs with thousands of eyes and skin as smooth as silver. Moon beasts, he had called them, and he claimed that the crash of the monoliths was the first step in their plan for coming to Earth. We had hoped to keep these matters private, but because of your own meddling, we've attracted the interest of a third party, somebody that wants to invest in this goose chase, Marsh told me. And to my surprise, he told me that this new company wanted to hire me full-time as a medical professional. You understand, of course, this is a sort of employment would be off the record and the academy would deny any involvement, Marsh warned. I was still dumbstruck by this sudden turn of events, so I did my best to keep my feet on the ground and recap what was happening. So, a fresh-faced entrepreneur company wants to hire me as a medical professional based off my theories relating to esoteric magic and star charts from ancient cults, I asked, rubbing the back of my neck sheepishly. It all sounded a bit outlandish. That's all I know for now. Mr. Lang is meant to contact you shortly and give you further detail. But I should also advise this is not the sort of position that you turn down, James. Your papers make the academy look bad. We're doing you a favor by letting it slide and getting you out of our hair rather than kicking you onto the streets. I grit my teeth, trying to think fast as I stood up and looked at his taxidermy trophies. If that's the case, then it would be awful for anybody to realize that you were ostracizing me just because I spoke the truth, I countered. Marsh raised a weary eyebrow. He knew that I was threatening him. What do you want? All we want is to make this go away. Let Ossett have the headache, he said tiredly. I knew my demands before he even finished speaking. Herbert and Severn, their expertise in these fields exceeds mine and their insights will be valuable. They will be joining me for this new assignment, I told him. Marsh promised he would make it so, and so he did. I didn't really pay much attention to the details of our transfer to the small town of St. Mavis. There was a clinic there that was reopened for Ossett a few months back, and that was where I got to meet Lang. He was a tall, dark-haired Asian man with a brutish spirit, and most of that first meeting is a bit of a blur. I was too eager to find out what sort of work my colleagues and I would be assigned to pay attention to, especially because I knew it meant some of the theories that I had written about might be true. When I expressed such excitement to Lang, he promptly offered to give me the charts and notes that were connected to the scandal the Academy so vehemently wanted to cover up. The Zwain incident, he called it. For posterity, I'll provide a short summary of what we found in those notes before I explain what we did with this knowledge. Despite being a religious zealot, I was surprised in the writings of Abraham Zwain to find that he was a learned man, and he studied astrology and philosophy quite avidly. He included quotes from Shintoism and even ancient Mayan texts in his writings, which all centered around the belief that the world we live in is not the only one that exists. In short, Zwain saw through the monoliths a secondary realm that exists alongside the one that we live and breathe on. The true world, as he called it, sounded starkly different than the flourishing life of Earth. Zwain said on the other side of the mirror, life hardly existed at all. There were long streaking lines of white and strange tall buildings that defied architectural standards of our world. Corridors and stairwells that panned whole galaxies and seemed to circle black holes. He theorized that these places were connected somehow to the star charts from the church, and that the church itself was in fact a conduit which held more power in our universe than others. A conduit he claimed was the result of the collected memory of the culture around that spot. The longer the collective memory could recall details about the location of the true world that existed there, the longer the location would still exist in our world as well. This explained why the members of the congregation felt an otherworldly connection. When they saw and prayed in the pews, they were actually sliding in and out of an alternate dimension. We're hoping we can try to learn more about this collective memory that he spoke about. We begin trials tomorrow, Lang explained. I should have had further questions about all of this, but the sheer excitement to be a part of the groundbreaking discovery was so overwhelming that I kept them to myself. The next day, we had about a dozen people show up to participate in what Lang called a clinical trial. The drugs we administer here are not FDA approved, of course, so we'll be signing waivers and non-disclosure agreements. You'll be paid once the 6-week period has come to an end. In private, he explained to me that each patient would be given a slow drip of psychedelic drugs and other substances that were designed to enhance neurological functions. I began the testing immediately. It took less than 48 hours for one of the subjects to die. I would like to say that I knew their name or that I understood why they had died, but I can't say either of those things because I would be lying. I had just finished a shift rotation on the other side of the facility where we were working to manufacture the equipment for these samples when I heard a loud scream from the patient area. My natural instinct was to run and assist. Herbert was there holding down this patient as she cried horribly and shook and vomited. After a full recovery about an hour later, I took the time to obtain a statement. You were given approximately 4 doses before you experienced this unfortunate side effect. Could you describe what caused this or what you feel went wrong? The patient was looking at us like we were strangers even though we had been there for a while now. True, we hardly knew each other, but the level of distrust was disheartening. I encouraged openness, especially due to the health benefits. I'm starting to think that this might be a lie, she said as she coughed up more blood. Per standard protocol, I urged them to explain what caused their outburst. You'll think that I'm crazy, but I saw something slinking in the shadows. It felt like I was back there in those corridors, running from it. The halls never ended and the strange shadow just kept getting closer. I was soon aghast to discover that 4 other patients had similar experiences and I had missed them. That couldn't be a coincidence. When I told Lang about it, his response troubled me even more. Increase their dosage and monitor their brain activity. I want to get a clear picture of what they're seeing the next time that they have an episode. Are you suggesting that we actively place our patients in harm's way? I asked. We are only letting their mental state be at risk. Their physical body remains here. We have no means of crossing over to the other side, and neither do the creatures they are envisioning, Lang said dismissively. I wasn't so sure that was a solid excuse, but I was obeying orders still and not questioning the methods. I wanted to learn more and it felt like we were finally making progress. So I did as I was told. The results began to trickle again over the next month. Our patients were sharing the same nightmare. I documented what I could and found the notations even more terrifying than I care to admit. The first pair, a man and a woman, reported that the dream consisted of a labyrinth, much like the ancient Grecian mythos. This one seemed to be haunted by a beast that clawed at my patients' minds long after they woke up. The bear, it reeks of death, it hunts us relentlessly. We walked the halls for days trying to find a place to hide, but each path we took, even it felt like we were going forward, it wound us back around to the core of that awful maze. When they described the maze, the third patient said sometimes that there were doors and stairs. They did not always appear, but when they did, they would lead to different segments of this starry world. One led to a hotel. The rooms were always empty, but the patients would talk about screams and crying in the empty rooms, something trying to dig its way out from under. They often felt like their feet were heavier when they went inside these rooms, so they marked them as dangerous and avoided them as best as they could. Another talked about a forest. I found this framework quite interesting because it seemed to follow the same principles as the hallways. The forest would snag and twist about, circling a lonesome mountain that the patients never seemed able to reach. They would hear distant static that was luring them to the mountain, but the closer they got, the more the massive landmass would re-maneuver itself. Lang called these infinite corridors the key to our knowledge of the true world. He wanted more information and told me to continue to increase the dosages. It all seemed to be progressing well until the first suicide. It had been almost 3 months since we had started these human tests. Most of the people that we were using had lost sanity. Others seemed to have been driven to stay inside the dream world and refuse to wake up. The patient that passed away was actually one of Herbert's, a young man that came to the clinical trial for money to support his family. He was only meant to stay for a week. He was given the max dosage to enter the shared consciousness faster, and we documented what we learned via a new method Lang wanted to try, where the dreams were projected onto a screen. The subject, whom I must admit I never learned the name of, was immediately thrust into the corridors as soon as the syringe had pierced his skin. His readings were similar to somebody who had fallen from a great height. There were rows of doors in front of him, all marked very similarly with the number 3 on them. He approached the first one and tested it out, swinging it open to see another corridor that stretched for miles with glowing blue lights on either side. Before he went in, the subject tried the next door and found the exact same thing. Then they tried another door and another until they were surrounded by open doors that all seemed to lead to the blue, fiery hallway. They reluctantly entered and I whispered to Herbert if he had ever seen this portion of the alternate dimension before. I had been doing some studying of their mental health as they go into the true world. If I'm not mistaken, the halls and the mazes they find themselves in are of their own making. Each time that they're tossed into this labyrinth, they are making new pathways that intersect and grow the maze, he told me. I was fascinated by that theory, but too focused on the feed to provide any sort of insight on what it might mean. There was a single door in front of the subject. This one was already open, and inside there was a slender woman wearing a familiar outfit. "That looks like the uniforms from Osset," I commented, trying to get a better look at the woman. She was a redhead with sparkly blue eyes and, I'll admit, even attractive. She was mouthing words we couldn't understand to the subject, and I was trying my best to keep an eye on his physical reaction. Whatever she's saying to him, it's causing quite a spike in his adrenaline, Herbert said as he reached for the device that would take the subject out of the dream. "Oh wait, we need to see what happens. This could help us," I said. I regret pushing things that day. The woman kept talking, the levels kept rising, and then at the end of whatever speech she had given to our subject, she took out a syringe. It reminded me of the same one that we administered to place them within the dream. She plunged it into the patient's neck, and in that instant they woke. They gasped for air as if they had been drowning, their gaze confused and fearful as they looked at us. "What happened in there?" I asked, but they didn't respond. Before they even dared to try and comprehend the situation, the patient jumped from their beds and ran toward a nearby railing. They ran straight on past the railing, falling to their death without even a scream passing their lips. An autopsy revealed nothing out of the ordinary for their brain function. Lang considered the whole incident just a simple misunderstanding and miscalculation, but I wasn't so sure. I kept replaying the footage of the blue-eyed woman in my head over and over. Who was she? Did she work for us? What had she told the subject to make them want to kill themselves? Over the next few weeks, those questions were compounded by even more issues with the patients. Some were refusing treatment, harming themselves to stop their dreams. They just wanted to go home. I felt sorry for them, but Lang insisted that their work was hardly finished. We've only scratched the surface on what this maze is, what sort of abilities it can give us. We need more players in this game, James. Can you help us? I knew what he was asking. He wanted me to be a recruiter, and I played that part quite well. I went back to the academy this time as a representative of the Osset Company. Even though this campus had been my home for nearly 2 years, stepping back into it now was overwhelming. I didn't feel very welcome anymore. A few students stopped and saw my badge that represented Osset and made a few hushed comments amongst themselves, and then they zigzagged around to avoid being near me. I turned, about to ask what they were saying, when somebody bumped into me and dropped their coffee on my clothes. Watch it, I said, jumping back and looking at the young woman. She had curly red hair and freckles and blue eyes. She reminded me of the same woman that I had seen in the visions of our patients. But how was that possible? I'm so sorry, are you okay? She asked as I tried to ignore the burning liquid that covered my shirt. Fine, it's fine. Do I know you? I said as I helped her gather the papers that she had dropped. I couldn't help but notice familiar esoteric symbols and graphs on the paper. Was she a student of Zwain's teachings too? I don't think so, but you know me now. I'm Emma Carter, she told me as she spotted the logo on my shirt. You're with the corporation that we're contracting with, she asked in surprise. You're familiar with us. Headmaster Marsh made an announcement about a month ago that we had a new internship program happening with the company. But I'll admit that's not the only time I heard about you. Let's just say that there are a few ugly rumors circling about the people that go to work for them, Emma told me. Rumors? What kind? She pointed toward a nearby study lounge, and I followed her to discuss this privately. You probably know this firsthand, but the people who go to work for you, they never come back and finish their studies. They disappear, she whispered. I can see it in your eyes. You know that it's worse than that, Emma said while I averted my gaze. I thought about some of the things that had happened to the patients that I had tested with. I didn't want to think that we were hurting them, but I couldn't deny that it was dangerous. Some of them had already tried to off themselves, and some had been successful. I had been pushing these things out of my mind, focusing on the endgame for the research. But something about the way this young woman spoke made me pause and realize that I was being a monster. What is it? What do you know? Emma asked. I know that we've been dabbling in scientific discoveries that will shake the very foundation of our entire human race. Alternate dimensions that connect via endless halls. I paused to see if any of this sounded familiar and decided to make a guess about her studies. It's what Pastor Zwain was researching almost 100 years ago. Am I right? Emma actually looked surprised that I was so forthcoming. I think I might know something that can help you, she told me. She wrote a time and place for the South Dormitory to meet that very night. A group of us have been getting close to unlocking what Swain learned all those years ago. Bring your own calculations and I think we can reach a solid understanding of this alternate dimension. I'll admit I was stunned as she knew so much about this subject. It made me think about what I had seen in that vision. Was that an alternate reality where Emma had already become a member of Osset? Yet she was transforming my patients into monsters in that nightmarish place, I thought. If I decided to help her and we discovered a way to enter the true world right here on this campus, would it cause the same inevitable reaction for her in the future? Was this what fate was? I didn't have the answers, but the questions troubled me. It felt as though an unseen force was pushing me along. I didn't even feel that my free will was existent as I realized that the only course forward would be to meet with Emma and the other Zwayne acolytes. Whatever this power is, it wants us to find it, I decided. The true world was almost within reach and new information that could reinterpret the entire universe. As a man of science, I felt there could be no other way to go. I checked the map of the campus where Emma wanted us to meet. The location was obvious. The dark church where all of this started almost 100 years ago. I took a break at the cafeteria and took off my coat to eat a fine lunch. With my logo hidden, none of the students gave me dirty looks, and it was nice to think about my days as a learner here. So much had changed since then. The reflection made me feel guilty because of how I was now using these same students for the experiments of Osset. What had I become? I lost my appetite with that thought, collected my things, and I went toward the dark church. At this time of the day, the ancient structure was empty. Candles were lit through from a morning service, and I saw several books lying on the ground around what looked like a magical sigil. I knew better to think that this was a mundane act of worship, so I leaned forward to get a better look at the written words. But what I saw made little sense, at least at first. All it looked to me was gibberish. As I kept repeating the words in my head, somehow the translation came to me though, as if the book was telling me what it was trying to convey. Here the disciple Bifo lies, in sleepless nights he bleeds. Awake in his chaos, let loose his fury. A pit formed before my eyes, the endless void ripping open to give me a glimpse into eternity. This was the true world. I looked around. I should have been waiting for Emma, but the new portal beckoned for me to investigate. From the shadows I saw light, beautiful and ancient. It swirled and shimmered and shook the room. Immediately the candles fell down on the ground, the fire shaking and transforming as blood and dark slime was emerging from their wax, feeding this nameless monster. And then the walls around me formed reflections of my own self. No longer was I standing in the Carbuncle Academy. No longer was I in the world that I knew and loved. This was something else, dark and mysterious, yet it only spoke to me the truth. As these swirls of anger and blood formed a shape, its unimaginable face became clear to me, and when I saw what the mirror was showing me, I screamed. The reflection shattered into millions of pieces, and I realized how foolish we had been to even step foot into this place. I saw others trapped in the labyrinth, ones that I hadn't met yet. I can only assume they came from other timelines or dimensions, wandering this place and becoming faceless monsters. They could smell my fear. I stepped forward to try and get the attention of one that looked almost human. He had cut out his own eyes and he was mumbling about like a madman. "We cannot see the world beyond ours, for it invites death. Every path, every direction, it leads only to our extinction," he whispered as I passed by. The other creatures were feeding on themselves, crawling and making hallways of flesh as I ran through to find Emma, or to find anything that reminded me of the same reality that I came from. I saw her at last, standing like she had in that first vision, with a syringe in her hand. But she wasn't alone this time. The tunnel of flesh fell away and I was trapped in a white room with no clear dimensions. Carter stood there next to an operation chair, and beside her was an older man, perhaps in his early 90s, who greeted me cordially. "You're the one we have to thank for this new discovery, or so I've heard. It's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Wesley," he said. "How do you know me?" I asked. My voice sounded hoarse. "The walls of this place whisper your name often. In almost every iteration of these endless corridors, your name is the one that's being chanted wherever we ask who sent them here. It would seem that the entities that control this corridor have used you and people similar to you in almost every single dimension to keep themselves fed. You were puppets pulled here by forces beyond your understanding, And now the threshold widens and a new reality will be swallowed up, he said. The experiments weren't unlocking any potential for humanity. This was always a trap, I realized. It took you long enough, Emma said as strange faceless beings strapped me down. What are you going to do with me? You don't belong here anymore. There are still other places where a harvest must take place. We can handle the workload here, and you will remain our puppet. I looked at the older man, a realization of who he was. You're Wayne, the one that killed those students all those years ago, I said. Killed? Heavens no. I awakened them to their full potential. They are here, part of the endless tapestry. The shared consciousness is a way for our species to live forever, James. What I've done is give them immortality, he cackled. Emma plunged the syringe in my neck. I will fight this. I'll find a way to save you, I told her. She looked sad. Her eyes told me that she believed it was too late. The walls of flesh began to close in. I was drowning in their vitriol and then coming up for air in the dark church. My hands were clammy and shaky as I walked away from the ritual circle. The Emma that I knew was in the doorway, a bit perplexed by my strange behavior. Dr. Wesley, are you still trying to recruit us? She asked. No, sweet child, you must flee from here. Only devil's work is being done here. We have to get away, I told her. Emma didn't want to leave with me that evening, and it was the last chance that I got to speak with her. I sent in my resignation to Osset the following evening as I caught a train to Clear River. They didn't seem to hold a grudge, but instead pressed forward with their work to map and understand that labyrinth undeterred. I tried again to reach out to Emma, only to learn that she had already decided to join the corporation. It feels like no matter what I've done, fate has found a way for the endless halls to grow, the doors to grow more numerous. Soon I suspect that many others will find their way into these backrooms of the mind and become trapped there. Spread the warning and stop this madness as much as you can. Please, we might not be too late. At the very least, we might be able to be prepared for what comes next.